The meeting will begin in 1 minute. The meeting will begin in 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to call this meeting of the Land Use Committee to order. It's Monday, October 17th, 2016, and welcome everybody. I see we have a packed house in here now, and I think we're missing one committee member, Councilor Selberg. I would assume he's going to be back here shortly. But anyway, our agenda is relatively short this afternoon. Our first order of business is to approve our minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve. Staley.
Second.
Okay, very good. All in favor respond by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Okay, our one and only item of discussion today is proposed changes to private business management practices. In other words, the BMP ordinance, and Lance Weatherly is here to present. So welcome, Lance. Good to have you here.
Good evening, councilors. Lance Weatherly presenting on behalf of Public Works, a proposed ordinance to regulate the maintenance and operations of privately owned BMPs, also known as best management practices. I'm going to summarize and streamline this presentation as we are planning to bring this back to informational and first and second readings as well. Storm drainage staff worked on drafting this ordinance, leveraging our city attorney, Diane Best, and our environmental departments as well. So to start, what is a best management practice? What is a BMP? Basically, a best managed practice, BMP, is an engineered device which treats and stores stormwater to be released. In the slide up there in the lower right-hand corner, there's kind of an engineered drawing, and is basically that is what is going on in the picture in the background. There's a filter under that grass. When stormwater comes in, it has pollutants in it. It is filtered out, essentially draining through that filter through an under drain and into the storm sewer. And essentially what it is it's treating, it's filtering out sediments. You can get oil, all sorts of sand from your streets and other locations. Essentially, there are different types of BMPs. The most common is the one shown in front of you for privately owned ones. It's called a PLD, which stands for a porous landscape device. There's many others, including retention ponds, sand filters, constructed wetlands, retention basins, and bioretention. So notice that the title of the presentation was privately owned. What is the difference between privately owned and publicly owned BMPs? Publicly owned BMPs are typically throughout the city with new development, and they treat and detain storm water in a regional area, whereas a private BMP is more of a site-specific in one single location. Here is a general location of privately owned BMPs within the city right now. And essentially it is the stormwater treatment plant spread throughout the city. Whereas wastewater, we have one single treatment location. BMPs are our treatment plant for stormwater throughout the city. Why do we need a privately owned BMP ordinance? In conjunction with the first and only Phase 1 MS4 stormwater permit in South Dakota, which Sioux Falls has, private BMPs were started to be installed in about 2003. Many of them are approaching a decade of age, and we want to be proactive and educate our facility owners on private BMP maintenance responsibilities. And this ordinance would give us the authority to ensure compliance with maintenance and operation requirements. The references we used in developing this ordinance, we used very similar language to an existing ordinance regarding our industrial pretreatment program. And we also looked at private BMP ordinances in the following peer communities. I won't go through them, but they are communities that, you know, are representative that we would look to. They have, a lot of them have development going on. So we're looking at our peers to see how are they doing things and talking to them with some lessons learned. We did develop a very concise and simple to understand ordinance, proposed ordinance. As with anything, if we're going to bring new ordinance or compliance out, we want to do some outreach and reach out to industry, get their input, let them know what we're proposing to do. We have presented this proposed private BMP ordinance to IRAB on two occasions. The first time they asked for some additional time to consider it and bring it back again, which we did, and also the home builders asked us to present at one of their meetings, which we brought to them as well. At the September IRAB meeting, they did do a unanimous vote of support for our proposed ordinance. So in a nutshell, what are these proposed ordinance regulations going to do? They're going to require that private BMP owners properly construct, operate, and maintain private BMPs. So removing debris, vegetation, sediment, repairing eroded areas, reseed, replacing filter media, and pest control. The picture in the background is, some BMPs are, this one is actually an engineered manhole that has a filter within it, and what the picture is showing is there's a lot of debris in that inside, basically that filter basket that needs to be cleaned out for that to properly operate. One section of the proposed BMP ordinance grants the city the right of entry for inspection and sampling. Since these are privately owned BMPs, they are on private property. And the proposed language does give the city the right to be able to inspect BMPs. Some of these BMPs, they are underground in a parking lot, so if vehicles were parked over top of an access hatch or someone had storage units over it, it would also give us the authority to work with them to be able to inspect. Enforcement and penalty. In summary, any entity in violation would receive a written notice of violation stating the nature and providing a reasonable time to a correction, not to exceed 90 days. Some of these that we've inspected, just as to date, we've provided letters to 4, just kind of on a cursory basis to see how the reaction of the industry was to things we found with some inspection. And it's been overly positive. Basically, this picture in the background is what that grate, it drains to a private BMP, and it appears that someone's been dumping grease into it. So that would affect the operation of a privately owned BMP. Wanted to say, this ordinance is a continuation of the city's efforts to promote water quality in the Big Sioux River and other areas, and also help educate facility owners with being proactive with regarding their maintenance operations, these privately owned BMPs. Many of them are going to be approaching a decade of age, and we're wanting to get out onto the forefront of helping these facility operators be able to operate these BMPs as they were intended and treat stormwater as it is intended. And with that, I guess I would take any questions and request a vote of support to continue this to City Council informational session.
Okay, thank you, Lance. Any questions? Councilor Staley.
Going back to that, you had a residential or a business photo. It looked like a swampy area next to it, over to the left-hand side. You're right there. So is that a
That is
what's
a
going on
privately owned BMP, and what's going on there? That is one of those filters, and what has happened over time is it's sediment is now clogging it. Essentially, the filter is not working anymore, so water's not able to
That's
drain
that's
through.
an example of what you don't want to have happen.
Yes. So what the owner will need to go in there is basically remove that top layer of the grass, take that filter material out, that there's sand under there, a peat sand moss mix, and basically rejuvenate, put new filter media back in and reestablish that.
And I know that Bracco's was brought up as one of the places that name had come up, surfaced in the past as maybe needing attention on this. Have you heard from businesses that any feedback from these places about this
We did a small sample of going out and identifying some things, and the large majority of items we found is basically debris in there. There's usually an outlet structure, so could be full of pop bottles and just trash, and sometimes vegetation will get caught in that. So that's not too big of a thing to do, but something like this, these types of privately owned BMPs, at some point the filter is going to clog, and they're going to have to,
But is there any feedback have you had any, you said that the home builders were behind you on this, right?
Yeah, they had some concerns. One was just that if we saw cattails out there, that we weren't just going to say, you need to clean the whole thing out. We look at, is the BMP still able to function with vegetation in it? Now, where usually it's not is when the outlet structure is overgrown with vegetation, and what happens is that'll get sucked down in there over time and actually clog the actual outlet structure. So that's kind of the rule of thumb we're using. There is one other thing within the ordinance they had concern about. One was publication of people in non-compliance if they're chronic violators. That is synonymous with the industrial pretreatment ordinance, and just like kind of when someone fails alcohol checks, it's publicly known. But in essence, yes, we did get a vote of support from IRAB for this, which they have a voting member on.
So how are you going to notify all these businesses about the ordinance? Is that going to be like a mailing to places to let them know that this
What we plan on doing is developing an FAQ sheet and mailing it to all private BMP owners, even in advance of us going out there, just given some FAQs, some tips for maintenance of the common types of things we're running across.
How many are there, do you think?
There's approximately 354 in our list right now. About 10% of those are interim ones, which would be mothballed at some point in time when a public regional facility is installed, but that's how many there are.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question. So we have a map of the location of all these in the city, and then how often does somebody go to inspect these?
We're looking to probably inspect these on somewhere between a 3 to 5 year rotational basis. So it's about, we're continuing to grow, so we would evaluate that at times. So we've inspected probably 60 to date, so it leaves quite a fair share number out there, and we'll go through those on a rotational, trying to do probably a 3 to 5 year rotating.
And if one isn't, you just probably leave a message with whoever it might be if one is maybe half clogged or needs some maintenance, isn't completely plugged, but just lets them know where they're at with these. And then
what we do is we send them a letter that basically identifies an issue and provides a corrective action, and would mail them a letter. So something that's really small like that, we would probably provide them a letter just as a courtesy. We're also trying to work on some sort of system to be able to coordinate for them being out there if they want to, just to be a part of that inspection process, to just see what we're looking at, and if there's some tips we can have for them right at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Neitzer.
I have a handful of questions. I haven't been able to read this in its entirety, but I just wrote some notes down. So you did mention the first thing. I found it kind of interesting, the publication of users in significant noncompliance. Besides being, I guess, a public shaming list, what is the idea of having publishing a list?
I would, I would say if we're dealing with an entity that, chronically is just being non-compliant and just totally ignoring us, it's a tool we might have to encourage them to be in compliance.
I don't know, this might be beyond your scope. Are all NOVs, I mean, there's NOVs for lots of things. Are those all public? Can I find out who got a notice of violation that they didn't mow their lawn and then they mow it? And can I find out if my neighbor's gotten NOVs? I mean,
I'm going to have to defer to our legal advisor on that.
I don't know the specifics of code enforcement about.
Diane, would you just identify yourself real quick?
Oh, I'm sorry. Diane Best, Legal Counsel for Public Works. I don't know the specifics about code enforcement, whether that initial letter that is not a code citation, whether that would be public or not. And I don't think that's what's intended to be published here. It would be the actual notice of violation or citation. So if you got a letter that said, it's your BMP is all mucky and it needs to be cleaned out, and but this is a warning letter or something, that wouldn't be the part that would be published. It would be the actual violator.
Oh.
But in answer to your question about environmental laws, generally, the industrial pretreatment provision in the city ordinances as it currently exists does require publication of industrial users that are out of compliance. And that is part of our delegated requirement from the DENR, from the EPA. Also, another example is the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. When an entity is, whether it's public or private, either way, if they are supplying drinking water and they fail to carry out their duties, those citations are made public as well.
Okay. Well, maybe offline I'll have to find out exactly. It says all notices of violation are public, just to get a clarity of what exactly a notice of violation is, if that's just a warning letter or if that's actually when there's actually been a fine levied. Or
It does go on to say there are significant noncompliance, and that is chronic violators, not necessarily, the first letter is just here is what is not in compliance. You essentially have 90 days to comply. That's the courtesy. After that, when there isn't a corrective action taken, then it would go to a violation.
Okay, and when I'm going to do a development, I have to get a development permit, obviously, and it would go. One of the things it would go to is you, and then you may require that I put in a BMP. Would that be fair to say?
With development, it does come through the engineering office to be reviewed for the drainage design. Essentially, is a BMP required? Yes, so we do review that. We review the calculations for that. So essentially, that's how we know where this map is at. They're essentially BMPs that have been reviewed by our engineering team, and then likely a developer would construct those. And this is the operation and maintenance being upheld, 5-10 years after the fact. Is it functioning as it is intended?
And on the front end, for probably two reasons, I think, for a BMP would be not only to clean the water, but to help to detain it on site and not have it flowing off site.
That is a benefit as well, because you need to detain it. You need to detain the water to be able to treat it. So yes, that's.
So I guess what I'm getting at is that if the BMP starts to fail, it's not just something that just affects me. I could adversely impact neighboring property owners. Would that be? Yeah. Why we'd have an interest in
this picture right here, it's storing less water. than what it was originally designed, and most of them are designed with 20% additional in it, but
Okay, and if you don't mind,
Go ahead.
any commentary on, I don't know exactly how it works with other codes, but entry into private property, or, I mean, do you have the authority to just walk onto anybody's property and, you know, go through fences and inspect and open up manholes and just go down there, just walk and?
the majority of these BMPs are might be on private property, but it's in a very public place. It's usually right next to a sidewalk in a parking lot. So yes, this is granting us the authority that we will be able to bar us from looking at it. Now, if we haven't had any issues with any operators up at this point with the inspections we've done with any of that. This is more as someone have one kind of maybe in an industrial area that the entire site is fenced. We can't get to it, and you know, maybe they just want, well, we don't want you to have you look at it. Well, this gives us the authority to be able to inspect it.
And then finally, so what is the penalty or action that you can take if somebody is in non-compliance?
It refers to our general ordinance language that is $100 the first day of
The normal 100,
the normal,
200, 300?
100, 200, 300.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Staley.
Two things. First of all, just a clarification, Bracco's was, I guess, cited as a good example of these BMPs in action. And secondly, we're talking about, as Councilman Neitzer was talking about, inspection. Are they going to, I'm looking over here at 157, so will they be given notification you want to come into the property?
Yeah, when we discussed with IRAB at the second time, that was something that came up, was a request to have a notification. Now, if there's 60 we're going to look at, it would our intent is to send a letter with giving some general time frame that we're going to be there with contact information, and if they want to follow up with us and get additional information or have a better understanding, we're going to be there. Yes.
Will that be in the ordinance? Is it in here that I'm not seeing?
It's not in there currently.
Will it be added then?
We weren't planning to add that in there. That gives us the flexibility to work with that. It is a large undertaking to schedule staff with 60+ visits a year, but certainly it's something we can take a look at and take it under consideration.
Councilor Knight.
One other question occurred to me. Would you be planning to do what kind of like a proactive, sort of like go around and do different zones every year and try to keep looking at them, or would this be more of a, you notice a problem as you're driving by? Or
we try to do a random, so one developer doesn't feel like we're hitting 6 of their sites in a row in any one location. But if staff are aware of one that they know that, like some of those pictures up there that we know that aren't functioning well, we're certainly going to look at those and get those addressed. But we're looking at kind of more on just a random basis, working through it. So you know, everyone is getting, you know, some inspection. So
okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So Lance, the primary part of this ordinance then is simply the right of entry. Is that safe to say?
I would say the primary impetus is giving us the explicit authority to enforce the operation and maintenance of privately owned BMPs. Right of inspection is of course part of that, but you know, there's with our permit, we want to make sure the private BMPs that are under the umbrella of our permit are also in compliance too. This is giving us explicit authority to go in there and regulate that.
Okay, thank you. And Councilor Neitzer had pointed out that the penalty actually is not impacted. That's already in place.
Correct. That refers to our general code ordinance.
They do have the 90 days to remediate
Yes.
any issues that would be discovered after the inspection. So thank you very much for working with individuals with IRAB and others that will be impacted by this. And I would state that in addition to potential impacts on neighbors if a BMP fails or isn't doing its job any longer, I mean, obviously it has an impact on the river because that water eventually is dumped into our river. So if it's unable to filter as it's designed to do that, then it's not as effective in that fashion. But thank you very much. And Lance is looking for a motion to move this forward to an informational at some point in November. We don't have a date that we're going to designate, but just so that individuals that might have an interest in this particular topic have an idea, it will be presented most likely in that midpoint in November, mid to third week or so. So would anybody like to make a motion to move this forward to an informational in November?
I will make a motion to move this forward to informational at a date to be determined.
Second, Selberg.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. That brings us, Lance, thank you very much. Good job.
Thank you.
Open discussion. Any items for open discussion? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.